gave his farewell address at the Military Academy at West Point. And in the address, he acknowledged the Corps of Cadets and the future Army officers and gave them their charge. And after that, he addressed the civilian responsibilities of politics, I guess you'd say. So this is the words of General Douglas MacArthur. Let civilian voices argue the merits or the demerits of our process of government. Whether our strength is being sapped by deficit financing indulged in too long, by federal paternalism grown too mighty, by power groups grown too arrogant, by politics grown too corrupt, by crime grown too rampant, by morals grown too low, by taxes grown too high, by extremists grown violent, whether our personal liberties are as firm and complete as they should be. He refers to the Corps of Cadets, the future Army officers, as the long gray line. And everyone who graduates from the Military Academy becomes a member of the long gray line. The long gray line, and this is his words again, the long gray line has never failed us. Were you to do so, a million ghosts in olive drab, in brown khaki, in blue and gray would rise from their white crossings, thundering those magic words, duty, honor, country. So would you join with me now in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. Now I'd like to
It's great to be here tonight together, looking into the future of our state, remembering on our own currency where it says in God we trust. So let's just go to that God and pray. Heavenly Father, we open this forum to you tonight, that we will represent ourselves faithfully and true, that this will be a time that we can learn about each other, about our heritage, and to share about what's next in our future. And that we may include you in every step of that future that we take on, Lord. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. Dave Hicks will come up and welcome everybody and tell us a little bit more about our night.
Okay. Yeah, I do want to welcome everybody and thank you for being here and taking time out of the day. And you guys also. This is important what we do here. And a couple of housekeeping things. Grab as many cookies as you want. Water, coffee, but kind of prefer that you kind of sit while we're in our forum here. There are bathrooms across the street, if need be. Watch out for the traffic in our city. There are bathrooms. Just follow the lights as you go in, if need be. And yeah, thanks for coming. And I guess on behalf of the co-op, we're privileged to have a facility here that we can do this. It doesn't get much more rural Iowa than an agricultural seed warehouse in the little town of Gaza. And I think that we want a voice in Des Moines, and that's part of why we're here. And so we want these guys to remember, and they all know it, but we want them to remember that Northwest Iowa is an agricultural community, and we have concerns that we want them to address. So we welcome questions, and I would like to introduce just a couple of people. There is our state senator from District 2 is here tonight. Jeff Taylor, would you stand just so? This is Jeff Taylor. He might be working with one of these people. Because that's the other thing, is our House representative and our Senate representative for this district, they're in this room tonight. Because essentially, our election is June 7th. There is nobody else on the ballot at this point in time. So it's imperative that we get to know these individuals. And yes, Jeff is going to be working with a couple of them. So the other thing I'd like to mention is a guy who's been kind of instrumental in putting a lot of this together. He's made a lot of contacts, and I'd like to acknowledge that. Dennis Fogan. Dennis, would you just stand? Just because you can. Dennis has done a lot of this. I have the privilege tonight of introducing our moderator for the evening, and a very capable person. Comes from North Dakota, decided that an Iowa farm boy was the love of her life for some reason. So, Danny Jo Rader will be our moderator tonight, and she will have an able assist from Denise Steffen. So I'd like you to welcome them as we get started tonight.
Good evening, everyone. As Dave said, I'm Danny Rader. I reside in Sutherland, Iowa, with my husband, Cody. Tonight, to start, we will be introducing the candidates. They were each asked to bring us a brief bio, a little about themselves and why they're seeking the position they are. And then we will have a quick little question to kind of get to better know them. And then we have questions that were previously submitted that we will be going through. So to start, we are going to start with our House candidates, and we're going to start with Mr. Tom Kuiper. Tom graduated from Sibley in 1985. He spent 2 years at Iowa Lakes, worked for a year in upstate New York, and graduated from Iowa State in 1990. Worked on a Caribbean cruise ship for 6 months, 3 years in Des Moines, then spent 11 years in Northern California working as an employment paralegal. He moved back to Sibley in 2007 to marry Denise. He works as an unemployment hearings representative. He's written 2 quote books on Hillary Clinton and has written over 100 columns for the Northwest Iowa Review. This is his first run for a political office. Next up, we have Zach Deacon. Zach is running for the new 5th District in the Iowa House as a conservative Republican. He has lived in Northwest Iowa his entire life, growing up in Georgia, graduating from Northwestern College in Orange City. He would get hired immediately after graduating from college by the Iowa State Patrol. He has been working for the Iowa State Patrol since the summer of 2012 and lives in rural O'Brien County with his wife and son and one on the way. He says why he is running is simple. For several years, he and his wife have been quite burdened by the abortion issue. We live in a country in which we legally murder our own children. God hates that, and we seek to be a voice for abolishing or eradicating abortion completely. Secondly, he says we run to protect our families from a liberal agenda that seeks to indoctrinate children into sexual perversion and hatred. The last couple of years specifically, our rights and liberties have come under assault. The very fabric of our nation, that is family, is under attack. Seeks to defend our children, families, and future liberties. Thank you, Zach. Our third candidate for the House is Dennis Bush. Dennis currently represents Iowa House District 3 and is seeking the Republican nomination for the new House District 5. This includes most of the current Iowa House District 3. Dennis has been married to his Deb for over 48 years, and they have 2 sons who live and work in Cherokee County and 10 grandchildren. Dennis is a 5th-generation Cherokee County farmer and has farmed his entire life, except for his time in the Marine Corps. Prior to being elected as a state representative, Dennis served on the Marcus Meriden Cleghorn School Board, on the Cherokee County Veterans Affairs Commission, and for 2 terms as a Cherokee County supervisor. He has also served in numerous non-elective positions to include his church Research and Cherokee County Pork Producers. Most of Dennis's committee assignments as supervisor dealt with mental health services. In 2017, Governor Reynolds appointed him to the Iowa Mental Health and Disability Services Commission. Dennis ran for the Iowa House in 2020 to be a strong voice for agriculture, mental health services, and his district. He is seeking to continue using the knowledge and experience he has gained to represent O'Brien County for another term. Thank you, House candidates. In the Iowa Senate, we have Anthony LaBruna. Anthony attended Iowa State University, where he fell in love with the state and their American values. As a Cyclone, Anthony led the College Republicans as vice chairman of the executive board. During college, Anthony worked in the 4th Congressional District Office, connecting with farmers, veterans, and everyday Iowans to ensure constituents had access to government officials. He is an advocate and a resource for Northwest Iowans looking to navigate the complicated federal government. Anthony also clerked in the Iowa State Legislature, focusing on safeguarding First Amendment rights, easing regulations on farmers and small businesses, and various public safety initiatives. In 2020, Anthony was appointed by President Donald Trump to White House liaison to the United States Department of Commerce under Secretary Wilbur Ross. At the Department of Commerce, he oversaw an annual budget of $12.2 billion in discretionary funds to help manage the U.S. Census, implement trade tariffs, and safeguard First Amendment rights. In addition, this role he provided oversight for over 220 personnel within the Commerce Department to implement high-priority executive directives. After serving in the White House, Anthony returned to Iowa to work for Senator Chuck Grassley. And our final candidate is Lynn Evans. Iowa Senate District 3 candidate Lynn Evans lives in Aurelia with his wife, Midge. Lynn and Midge are both Northwest Iowa natives. Lynn grew up in Aurelia and Midge was raised in Alta. They've been married for 37 years and have 2 wonderful grown children. Their daughter Erin lives in Altoona and is a nurse, and their son Trey lives in Des Moines and is an electrician. Lynn spent 33 years in K-12 education as a teacher, coach, and administrator. He most recently served as Alta Aurelia's superintendent, and prior to that, he served as superintendent in the Hartley-Melvin-Sanborn School District. Lynn is currently a Buena Vista University adjunct instructor, and he works as a client services specialist for JMC Inc. As a strong pro-life, pro-Second Amendment conservative, protecting the rights of the unborn and protecting our God-given constitutional rights are non-negotiable. Lynn's additional priorities are increasing access to mental health care, growing our rural economy, and ensuring all children have access to a world-class education. Thank you, candidates. So to kick this off, we are going to start with, I'm going to call it a fun question. You'll have 2 minutes to respond, and Chuck will be my timekeeper over here. Please don't make me yell. So, we will start with you, Mr. Tom Kiper, and this will be the same question for all of you, sorry, so you get the disadvantage there, Tom, but what amendment is most important to you, and why?
The First Amendment. Am I on? The First Amendment, I think it's very important we be able to express ourselves. What a lot of people don't realize is that the First Amendment has 5 separate rights to them. Obviously speech, religion, press, and then the right to assembly, peaceably assembly, and then the right to redress the grievances to our government. But we've seen obviously with the whole Twitter uproar in the last few weeks, the First Amendment, freedom of speech is actually under assault in our country. I think it's very, very important we are allowed to express ourselves, whether it be coming from the government and Joe Biden's new, as I like to call it, the Ministry of Truth, which was straight out of 1984, although they're actually calling it the Disinformation Board. But it's just, our freedom of speech is under assault, everything is so politically correct. We need to be able to express ourselves and engage in honest, straightforward conversations, and unfortunately, because of political correctness, those on the spelled out. I do not believe in that. So I think the First Amendment for me.
For me personally, it's the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, to me personally, is the protector of all other amendments. I think that the difference between us and Australia and Canada, where we were seeing other nations arrest pastors and throw their citizens in quarantine camps for not getting a shot, is because we're an armed populace and they are not. And so the other amendments are great, but the protector of all other amendments is the fact that we are an armed populace. That cannot be infringed. It needs to be solidified in our Iowa Constitution, because it is not yet. It's not something that I even knew until I started running. But the Iowa Constitution does not afford for the actual Second Amendment verbiage, and that's something that we need to enshrine in our own state constitution as a rebust against the federal government. So I was pro seeing our state go constitutional carry. Even as a law enforcement officer, I thought it was a good move. And yeah, I just can't reiterate enough. Our whole Constitution is unique and wonderful and amazing, but what makes it different is the Founding Fathers had the foresight to realize that we needed to be an armed populace to push back against tyranny. The Second Amendment is not about hunting and trap shooting and all that stuff. It's pushing back against tyrannical governments or future tyrannical governments that might infringe on our other amendments.
Well, this is kind of a hard choice, because both the First and Second Amendments are very important. But I think if I had to choose, I would say the First Amendment also, our ability to worship freely or orderly. I do think that we have an able to use this, our country, to continue to move forward. And we are seeing that our freedom of speech being infringed on, especially on some of our state universities this past year. Actually, last session, not this session, we passed a law where it would make sure that the conservative viewpoint could be heard on campuses. We heard over and over again how the conservative viewpoint was being suppressed, the liberal viewpoint was being maybe not pushed, but being strongly encouraged, and the conservative viewpoint was being hindered at every turn.
Oh, perfect. Well, it's, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I would say the First Amendment. I worked on a lot of legislation in 2018 when I was in the State House that kind of started what this last legislative cycle just pushed for. There was something called free speech zones on college campuses. So your tax dollars went to an institution, and then they would restrict conservative speech specifically. Right, so I worked for Congressman King for a while, and when we were working for him, we'd go chalk the campus. And only when we would chalk and chalk means you just writing your name on the ground, they would come and power wash it away. They wouldn't power wash away Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama. So when I went to the White House, you won't believe just what they're doing, these major tech companies. So I think we've done a lot, specifically for the First Amendment in the state of Iowa, but not enough. I think we need to implement something like Section 230 that President Trump signed into law, and then President Biden signed it out. And that basically prevents Facebook, Twitter from silencing conservative speech or other viewpoints. I think that needs to be added to Iowa code. I think that would start a major role in our direction as conservatives. And then I want to specifically talk about TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. As a young person, seeing what they're actually pushing on our students, right? Everything's an algorithm. Everything's there to take the choice away from the individual, from your child, and push them towards a more liberal agenda. And when we'd sit down with them, right, all these Chinese corporations have say in what's being pushed in America. So specifically on TikTok, here in the United States, they reward us for dumb dances, other things like that. Same thing with Twitter and Instagram. Well, in China, they're rewarding their students for doing music and engineering. So,
well, I'm going to say the Second Amendment, and the reason for that is there to protect us from tyrannical government. It's not about hunting. It's not even
predominantly about defending their home, although those are important things. But the reason that the rest of our constitutional amendments can stay intact is because we have the right to defend ourselves against a government that, well, you don't have to go too far outside of our own borders to see what's happening in Australia or Canada. If you don't have the right to defend yourself, if they take away your free speech, then the rest of your rights are easily taken away.
All right, thank you, candidates. Now on to the fun part. So we have several questions that were submitted ahead of time. If we have time at the end, we will allow questions from the floor, or if you want, put them on a card and bring them up to our table, you can do that as well. Kind of just the rules of the game here, gentlemen. We'll be going through those pre-submitted questions. You will be allotted 2 minutes to respond. I, as the moderator, will at my discretion interrupt you if I feel you're getting off topic or headed in an inappropriate direction. So you're at my mercy, gentlemen. I pray for you all. Senate candidates, you will have the added task of including in your answers how you as a Senate member would work to reconcile those that come to you from the House. If time allows, we'll allow questions from the floor as mentioned before. Do you have any questions? Well, let's begin. Starting from the federal overreach position, and we'll start with the House candidates, and you guys can answer, whoever wants to jump up and answer first, battle royale for the microphone. What is the state currently doing to protect citizens from federal overreach, and what can the state do in the future to prevent encroachment on personal freedoms from the federal government? Not all at once.
The minute that we decide that we're no longer going to rely on federal money for the programs is the minute we'll have our freedom. The overreach is because we allow the federal government to fund programs, take that money, and anytime you take government money, there's always going to be strings attached. Well, I mean, we debated when COVID hit, trying to prevent COVID passports, people actually having to receive the vaccine. We got it done on everything, but to the hospitals and the doctor's offices and anyone who received Medicare or Medicaid payments. And it's because the federal government can't control the strings, they control the money.
No, I would agree with that 100%, and I should have had the microphone first. No, I mean, I agree with that 100%. We're in the black as far as our Iowa budget is concerned. And so I would love to see us start weaning off the federal government. I have a budget at home, and so does everybody else in here. I don't overspend, because then I can't provide for what is necessary. What I think is necessary is eating off the government nibble. And so there is our freedoms attached to that dollar. I would say to add on to that, what I've already said about the Second Amendment, realizing that there are certain things that we can do to make sure that our rights are solidified in our state constitution. The Second Amendment is not one of those, so we need to enshrine that. Hopefully the legislators can get that figured out soon so we can vote on it on the ballot. I think it's even going as far as recognizing what court opinions are fallacious and to be ignored. Roe versus Wade is one of them, and how about that Supreme Court this morning? Well, it got leaked, so hopefully it's something that is going to turn out to be true. But it's recognizing where the states have their sovereign authority to ignore the federal government, period. And I think that we just need to stress that there are certain things that the Constitution allows the states specific rights in, and take advantage of that. So.
Just to follow up on that, yes, our governor, I think, did a pretty good job in COVID, as well as the South Dakota governor. I would also add to that, just also seriously consider a convention of states. I don't know all the details on that, but I think it is worth at least exploring, and we can possibly reclaim some of our freedoms through that as well.
So I'll add to that. I think specifically, one thing we have to understand as a state is there will always be that relationship between us and the federal government. We'll always have that relationship. And it is up to us to elect officials who represent us on that level, right? So starting with our Attorney General, like we as voters don't realize just how much power those positions on the ballot hold, Democratic or Republican. They represent us first and foremost, and we haven't seen that in the last couple of years with Tom Miller. So I think the first step for us is electing a Republican Attorney General. She will defend us from the overreach of federal government, and I think that's just the starting point of the spear there. Then it's for us to go through our bureaus and bureaucracy here in Des Moines, start weeding that down. That way we have more savings in our budget, and we don't have to rely so much on federal money to make those ends meet. And then going forward, you have to go there and you have to find it, right? So I call it the $1 million coffee cup. You see it everywhere, and the federal government will take as much as they can from you if we allow it. So if we can wean off that nipple sooner than later, we'll have more of a voice in Washington. And I think as being the breadbasket to the world almost, we should have a bigger say in Washington. So I think that starts with then electing people the Attorney General can work with in the Senate and in the House.
The Constitution allows for a balance of power between the federal government and the state government. But unfortunately what happens is the federal government, as was mentioned earlier, incentivizes their overreach. So they get you to buy into programs, they back that up with money, you accept their money, and then you're on the hook. One specific example I can make is the Federal Department of Education. In my opinion, that should be unconstitutional. There's nothing in our Constitution that gives the federal government the right to dictate to states how we educate our youth. That should be a right of the state and the individual. And that's one example. But they overreach by sending down funds through the state's Department of Education that filter into the school systems. And then you have to buy into their programs because they're paying you to do that. And so we need to get back to that balance of power. Article 5. Convention of States would be one way to do that. I do know a little bit about it. I'm not an expert in that in any means. But in the Constitution, it does allow for us to amend the Constitution through the Convention of States. So, thanks.
Recently, the Biden administration has developed a Ministry of Truth. What can be done at the state level to counter this potential attack on our First Amendment rights?
I think we just ignore it. Just to reiterate what the guys just said, we just ignore it. There's no reason whatsoever that we should have to obey that. And if they try to come, then we just bring in the media, folks over here. So truth is an absolute defense here, so just expose them for what they are. They're leftist stuff, really. So.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on ignoring it. It's just how do we ignore it? This is why what you guys are doing right now is extremely important, and that's investing in local elections. Who your local representatives are extremely important. Who your sheriff is extremely important. Who your county board of supervisors are extremely important. Who your mayor is extremely important. Relevant, well, it's relevant. I'll come full circle. During COVID, we were able to travel to Florida to visit family, and everybody was just blown away by the fact that we were so free here still. And that's because we have better leadership here in Northwest Iowa. We have a better culture of freedom here in Northwest Iowa. How do we push back against the federal government? We start caring about our local elections. Local control is where the freedom lies, and that's how we can push back, in my opinion.
Well, I agree with what's been said as far as we just ignore it. There's no money attached to it, so there really isn't any reason to do anything to ignore it. And we've tried on a state level to do everything we can to promote freedom of speech and to allow the viewpoint from all sides. We're seeing we're seeing things happen in the school with the teaching of CRT, critical race theory, the gender identity issues. Those, while allowing for freedom of speech, it's being forced, and there isn't the freedom to allow people to mature to where they can actually decide and take in the information we're trying to preserve it as much as we can, within the constraints of what the Supreme Court and our own Iowa Supreme Court allows us.
So I disagree. I don't think the answer is to ignore it. Specifically, I mean, we ignore the CRT. That's what happens, right? So 30, 40 years, it just doesn't pop up randomly. It just doesn't start. It builds up, bubbles up through the system, and then it breaches. And so I think we can't ignore. There is money attached to boards, especially presidential boards, stuff like that are put together. It's about $64,000 for taxpayers. So when a board is put together, I've vetted some of these individuals, some of the worst bureaucrats you'd ever see. They've been there for 30, 40 years. They abuse the system. They get paid for certain things, and it's just kind of unacceptable. So one thing I would hope is when we talk to our federal officials, both Senator Grassley, Joni Ernst, Governor Reynolds, and our members of Congress, and tell them, hey, push back on this. This is something we can't just continue to go on. So I would push back on it. I would do a resolution in the state not recognizing their authority here in the state of Iowa. And I think that's just a start. And then if we can get an attorney general who's a Republican who would push back against that, that would be great as well.
Yeah, I agree. It starts at the Attorney General's office, in my opinion. And we have to have a conservative Attorney General in there to push back against these overreaches. And we also have to reach out to those federal elected officials and tell them that, hey, we need to push back as well. But it does start with local control. And we do have to have strong city governments, county governments, state level governments. And in some respects, I think we do just say, we're not going to do it. Not necessarily ignore it per se, but we're going to do what's best for Iowans, not what the federal government says is best for Iowans.
Our public education system and the values it is promoting have been at the forefront of many headlines, newscasts, and social media posts. Do you feel parents have a right to know and have access to lesson plans, the syllabus, and teaching materials to know what their children are being taught? Please explain your stance.
I won't say the word, but heck yes. They not only have the right, they have the responsibility to know what's going on. And I just spoke to a parent, their child goes to a Christian school, and they have a camera in the classroom so they can actually see what the teacher is doing and saying. And I'm not sure that that's the answer for all public schools, but absolutely parents have the right and responsibility to know exactly what is being taught. And if something is not being taught that they agree with, it's the parent's responsibility to go to the administrators. My concern that I hear sometimes is that too many, well, a lot of people are taking their kids out of our public schools. And again, I'm not a fan of public education, the direction it's going. I just don't worry about the impact that it's going to have on our high schools and schools in the smaller towns, because the school is a central part of these smaller communities. But if the schools end up, public schools end up dying, so to speak, it is the fault of really them. And it's what we talked about earlier. It's coming, the directives are coming from Washington on down. So.
Now the question was, what does the parent have the right to know? My kids are mine, not the state's. And so I have the right to know anything that I want about my own children. And I will viciously defend my children and who educates them. To me, it's an issue of competing worldviews more than anything. You have an education system that is attempting to teach children not even biological science. The worldview of secular humanism is destroying our children before our very eyes. And so, they're my kids. They're your kids. They're your grandkids. They're yours. Name another time in history where we could say, the state comes along and says, don't worry, And I emphasize that, not just to be repetitive, but this is something that goes bigger than the 5 guys up here. Y'all need to know that too. Y'all need to be reminded of that too. If you guys have kids, and if you guys have grandkids, they're yours. Grab a hold of them, and grab a hold of what's yours and defend it.
We did pass a bill through the House that would do just exactly what that question asked to be allowed to do. And it's hung up in the Senate right now, tied in with a voucher bill, and I guess we're kind of in that right now. So I might as well come out and say it. The governor's trying to use this election as a referendum for her voucher plan. And I'm the only candidate running for the House of Representatives that's standing with our public schools. To paint all our public schools with the same brush is doing a disservice. Our public schools were established for a reason. I mean, we had private schools way back when the country was founded. The responsibility was recognized that there needs to be education furnished to all children. Now, we can have private education, but let's make them meet the same requirements the public school does. They cannot differentiate, they cannot refuse to accept children that have disabilities. They cannot refuse to accept the children who have behavioral problems. They have to furnish all the services. They have to be transparent. They have to be responsible for the same testing requirements. And I'll guarantee you that once the state money starts flowing to these private schools, their autonomy will get infringed on. They're not going to be able to operate like they are now. And I realize there's problems in some public schools. And I've been telling the governor, let's fix the problems. Let's not just let people jump ship. If you want to know what really happens when there's a concentration of private schools, go look in Sioux County and compare Sioux Central, Sioux Center, and West Sioux. Look at the graduation rates, look at their test scores, and Sioux County has probably the highest per capita private school in all of Iowa.
I'm going to grab the mic first. He keeps grabbing the mic. Actually, I'm ready. As a former school administrator, when they first came down with this transparency, my first thought was it sounds a lot like current best practice. Why wouldn't we be posting our lesson plans? I see Wade back there nodding. In most school districts, require lesson plans to be turned in. And I know, I work for JMC part-time, so what I do is help them through their student information systems, how to use those effectively. And they all have, not just JMCs, but all the companies, they have great programs, and all you have to do is hit publish, and it's available to the parents, like that. And in the current, I think, transparency bill, it's just posting your reading materials. It's not even full-blown lesson plans. Well, I wouldn't have a problem just posting the lesson plans for a week if you have to alter them. It doesn't take a lot of time to alter those. Now, the big lift in this is going to be where you're posting all your library materials. Now, most of our libraries are archived electronically. There should be a good way to do that and get it out there so you can see what's in those libraries. We do have teachers that have classroom sets of books, personal libraries for free reading and those kind of things. Those are going to need to get into the system somehow. But I don't think it's as big of an issue as some people are making it. Do I think parents have a right to know what's going on in the classroom? Absolutely. They're your kids, and you're paying the taxes for those schools. If you want to come in and sit in the classroom and watch what's going on, you should be allowed to do that. And yeah, I don't see a problem with any of that. So there was a lot of pushback early, and I didn't understand some of the pushback. So, yeah.
Well, I'm going to disagree with Representative Bush. I don't think anybody in this room thinks all the public schools are bad. I just don't see that. The teachers are a part of our community. They play a huge role with our children, and I don't think anyone in here specifically is like, all public schools are bad. But what I would hone in on is I think it's more than just budgets. I think those need to be available for parents to look at, see where their money is actually going, and make sure it's following the student. And at the end of the day, it's your money. If you would like to homeschool your child or put your child to a private institution, you're more than welcome. I think that money should be returned to you. You're paying into a system that you're not benefiting from. And so that's just my personal opinion. But, you know, I know that some schools, I had the opportunity to go to Western Christian over in Hull the other day. A lot of constituents send their kids there. Well, they don't say the Pledge of Allegiance. There was not even a flag in the classroom. And then when I went back and talked to the parents, they didn't know. So I think it should be for both private and public. I think if you're having a private institution and parents should have full access to what their kids are getting at the private institution and the public. And so when talking to parents, not realizing, you know, we have a lot of patriots, a lot of Trump supporters who send their kids there, and they were just astonished that the Pledge of Allegiance wasn't said and there was no American flags in the classroom. So that was my stance on education. Someone who's probably the most recent one out of the education system. There needs to be a lot of work done. I think that's working with individuals who know what they're talking about, but also bringing a fresh new idea to how to fix these issues, and then take care of our teachers because they are the backbone of our community. They love our kids, and we want to support them. I will say, I think CRT is still around. I was just in Spencer. They brought an expert in to tell us that there is no CRT in the institutions. Well, obviously they are if they're coming to tell us that there isn't. So.
Tourism doesn't compete with education, it helps pay for it. Earlier school start dates reduced the number of domestic travelers to attractions in the month of August, in turn leading to a decrease in consumer spending and less state tax revenue. For example, travelers spend over $1.7 million per day in the Okoboji area in June, July, and August. This directly impacts the Iowa General Fund by $112,000 each day. Will you continue to support school starting no earlier than August 23rd? Why or why not?
We were just talking about proper staffing levels on Sunday. And if you go to Okoboji, I think probably we all have, every place we go, restaurants, wherever, they're having problems with staffing levels. So right now, I would delay the school starting until after that date, possibly maybe even Labor Day. Because I think we do need to obviously get the tax revenue, but basically just overall get people working and have proper staffing levels at obviously Okoboji, but all over Northwest Iowa here.
I answer the question with 100% honesty and say I'm neutral to a start date of school. I would say that it probably behoove kids to learn how to work, and so the longer that they can have a summer job, if school is maybe prolonged into September a little bit, and it gives high school kids a little bit more of an opportunity to learn how to work, save money, benefit themselves financially, I'd be for that. You know, it's a huge benefit of being able to work during the summertime, and that's how I paid for baseball cleats and going to movies in the wintertime, you know, whatever. So I've honestly never even thought about that personally, and it's probably good for me to think about that. But the more I think about it, I think if we can give our upcoming generation any excuse to work and make money at any stage of life, I think it's only going to benefit them. So maybe starting a little bit later in the school year, allow them to work and learn finances and learn even how to find a job during the summertime. I think all those things are really good. So.
I guess I would continue to support the start date as it is now. Not all the schools are air conditioned, especially the elementary schools, and it never did make much sense to me that we bring kids in for half a day and then turn them loose because it's too hot in the classrooms. So, we can still get some hot days after the 23rd, but it isn't as bad as, and not as often as it is when we get into mid-August.
I'm kind of with Zach on this. I don't have children, and so I'm not specifically on a date that students should return to school, but I do think it is valuable to have long summers. As a kid, I made a lot of my money, especially in college and high school, during the summers, and that would pay for a lot of my things when I was in high school that you couldn't work or you couldn't do in college. Have to study on the books or focus on the books. I would be in favor of almost lengthening summer a tiny bit, give kids more opportunity to make money, to work hard, and I think that's huge to the next generation. I think that's something someone can speak about specifically is that wasn't pushed to go get a summer job. I went and did it myself, but I see it with this current generation, the next Gen Zs, they're not going out and working, they're sitting at home playing video games. I think if we could remove Xbox, PlayStation, phones, yeah, let's lengthen summer a little bit longer and let them go out and play in the sun and enjoy their childhoods, especially if you're high schoolers too. Parents, that bonding time, their kids may be going off to an institution. That's, for me, I had a longer summer going into my freshman year in college. My parents got more time with me, and that was valuable time that I'll never forget. So that's where I am.
If I asked your mother, would she say that the longer summer was a good thing? I'm sure I understand that. As a school superintendent, I was actually active during the time when they set that date, and it's August 24th. Is that still the date, the week, August 23rd? You have to balance local control with all this as well, I think. To be honest with you, as a superintendent, just tell me when I can start school and we'll set the calendar. It was a non-issue as far as an educational tool is concerned. So I really don't think that's something that I would take up necessarily. I wouldn't push to have a change on that. But when they did change that, it did take away local control. So if you live up in that Lakes region or travel up there, yeah, it's going to have an impact on tourism. If you live in another part of the state where tourism maybe isn't such an issue, then you still have to start with that same start date. You don't have the option of starting earlier. Looking back to, we were getting to the point where we were starting awfully early. You're talking 18th, 15th, some schools earlier. So nothing wrong with starting that week of the 23rd.
This has come up a little bit so far already, but regarding school of choice, does this affect your feelings about state funding of all institutions of education? And do you feel the state should issue education vouchers?
No, I don't think they should use vouchers for the public school. And I was an early proponent. My wife and I worked hard to have open enrollment within the public schools. There are a number of options for parents if they're unsatisfied with the school that they're in. You can open enroll out to any public school you want. You can homeschool if you so choose. And if you want to, you can send your child to private school. My wife and I did with our children for 2 years because there was not open enrollment. We paid several $1,000s a year so we could send them to a neighboring public school. And we worked hard to get that changed. But I cannot, in good conscience, allow money to be drained from the public schools to pay for private, and in most cases, religious education. So, and it is going to have an impact. I mean, the proposal that's kind of floating around now, they're going to pull $25 million to pay for 10,000 kids to have received education saving accounts for vouchers to go to a private school. And then with the tax cut that we just got done passing, there isn't $25 million to be drained away without hurting our public education. So the amount of growth that they told us we would be allowed to have was 2% going forward if we pass that 3.9% flat tax. And that $25 million, if we go that route, is definitely going to come out of public education, at least some of it will. And the group of us that fought for 3% allowable growth this past year are basically the same group that's fighting for education, to stop educational savings accounts. We were told by numerous superintendents they needed 3% because if their staff took them to arbitration, it was a guaranteed 3%. And Governor wanted 2.5%, the Senate wanted 2.5%. There's a group of us in the House that 2.5% wasn't enough. We finally agreed for 2.5%, and then to make up the addition difference between 2.5% and 3% with a supplemental bill.
I only have 2 minutes. Yeah, there's just a lot there. I appreciate Dennis's courage in expressing his views. I'll say that I'm full-blown school choice. To tell me as a parent that I can take my child out of one school that teaches a secular, humanistic worldview and enroll them to another school that teaches the same worldview makes no difference to me. Beyond the tax dollar, it goes back to the worldview that's being pushed on our children right now. There will still be money going to public schools. There will still be other tax money going to public schools. I don't have those numbers in front of me exactly what they are. I'll look them up for you. But the point is that I don't think parents should be pigeonholed into one option. And if I'm going to homeschool my children, which I'll be honest with everybody in this room, I plan to do, then the money that the government took from me, I should be able to use for my own child's education. That's my view. They're my kids, they're not the state's. I was reading a recent mini book by Milton Friedman, and he pointed out that in the early 90s we spent almost as much on education as we did on military. And look at the product that we have now. I personally don't understand it. I'm a young person. I don't have the life experience of most of those people in this room, but I personally don't see how we will continue to pour money into something that doesn't work. Name another thing that we do that with. Can you think of one? If our education system is as broken as it is, why do we keep dumping money into it? That is not the answer in my opinion. So I will be a proponent of full-blown school choice because I think as you as a parent deserve to teach your children the worldview that you think is best, and you shouldn't be pigeonholed into one option because there's no incentive for the school to get better if the money just stays in the student leaves.
Just to follow up on that, I'm going to agree with Zach. What is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. If the public schools are continuing to go woke, we need to send a message by taking our kids out and either doing what Zach does, homeschooling. All 4 of my brother's kids were homeschooled, or sending them to private schools. I think the money should follow the children. And I think the public schools and administrators and people at the state level, and hopefully eventually the national level, will finally get the message that they need to change what they're doing. And if enough parents start doing that, eventually they will change.
I take a little bit different approach to some of this. I don't see this as an either-or thing. When I say I want every kid to have access to a world-class education, I mean every kid. I'm sure some of you in here have been in classrooms at some point in time, or at least lately. If you haven't been, I encourage you to go visit your schools because Northwest Iowa has some of the best schools in the state, bar none. And when you look at the graduation rates in the state of Iowa, we're one of the leaders in the nation. So obviously we're doing some things right. To say it's a fully broken system, I don't necessarily agree with that, but we do have to do a lot of work. To say that we can give scholarship programs, USAs to parents and use those in private schools, I'm okay with that, to be honest with you. On a limited basis, you're talking 2% of the total student population in the state. And as long as it remains a limited option in the state, then I'm perfectly fine with it because they are your children. But I don't think that's the fix. Competition is good. And if you want to rise up and you want to compete just like in business, competition is a good thing. But we need to continue to put resources towards our public school systems. It can't be an either-or thing, in my opinion.
So
So I'll say I was a student who went to a private institution, and I'm a triplet, so that means my father sent 3 of us every year to a private institution for almost my whole entire education. And I know how hard he worked and how great it would have been for him to have some type of ESA or a voucher system for him to make up for the cost that he spent on my education. So I know that there are great public schools, there are great private schools, but I think at first, competition is fantastic. We need to breed competition. It allows parents to have that choice to send their child where they think they're going to get the best education, and that's not the state's choice, and that's not any bureaucrat's choice, that's your choice. And so returning money to people who want to send their child to a private institution or homeschool their child, I think that's the answer. I'm in full support of the ESAs and school choice. So.
We've witnessed elected officials lying to media and constituents, and even when it's on camera, nothing seems to happen to hold these individuals accountable. Should lying to media or constituents be an impeachable offense? Please explain.
Remember when Barack Obama said we were just 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the country? Well, on that particular point, he was honest, the one point. Of course, remember when he said that if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Well, that was a blatant lie, of course. So I have a little bit of an expertise. This is not a shameless plug. I don't make money on these, but I wrote 2 books on Hillary Clinton, so I know a little bit about lying politicians. So yes, if they lie under oath, obviously they should suffer the consequences. If they're lying, and again, let's face it, Trump stretched the truth at times here and there during the campaign or as president, then they should suffer the political consequences. And I think we would have a President Donald Trump today if he were a little bit more honest and open and not attacking so much. I think he should have won that last election. And again, I think we can also get into the election irregularities that happened. But he unfortunately lost a lot of support with suburban moms by being too confrontational and not being honest at times. So that's it.
Yeah, a couple things. It gets a little dicey when somebody just lies not under oath. So I think that is where I put the extra emphasis on why you guys should be here and be involved. Who holds lying politicians accountable that don't swear under oath? You guys, me. I fully expect to be held accountable for everything that I'm saying right now by you guys. If it's under oath, yeah, it's a punishable criminal offense. I think that anybody who lies under oath deserves a due process by the jury of their peers, and if found guilty, they face the consequences. But 2 weeks to slow the spread, we were told. President Trump could have gotten rid of Fauci. He could have gotten rid of other people who continue to lie, and he chose not to. So lying under oath is different than just kind of lying to the media, but that's where we do our job right here, what you guys are doing, and we bring the justice by getting these people out of office if they continue to lie to us.
And I'm going to concur that you are the ones who need to hold us accountable. I've been interviewed by the press as a farmer and once in a while as a politician, or anyway, someone who's been elected. And what you find out is that the media, that individual is interviewing you holds a certain, a degree in journalism. They maybe have no background in what they're asking you questions about, and frequently what you tell them, and you read the report afterwards, you wonder if they actually did talk to you. So, as I talk to my constituents, yes, you hold me accountable. I would not hold a lot of stock of what you read in the paper necessarily.
If you're not under oath, it's kind of hard to hold you to any legal standard. The impeachment is the vote. So you've heard I concur with the other 3. I really don't have anything new to add. But yeah, if they're lying and it's in the press or to you face to face, you need need to be able to call them on it, and our ability to impeach is vote them out of office. If they're under oath, then absolutely there should be a penalty of some kind.
Zach took all of our statements, but I'll piggyback off it a little bit. I mean, Republicans need to be held accountable just as much as Democrats. The press just as much as well, right? So again, you guys hold us accountable. You will vote us out of office if we are caught lying to you, but it's also for your job to be informed on what's going on. I'll give a plug to Senator Jeff Taylor. He speaks about this in an article, right? What's going on in the state Senate, what bureaucracy, the backroom deals that go on. And we have Republican leadership that says they're going to push one agenda, and they go through the backroom deals, donors get involved, and they change their minds. And so then it's a fight. So I think, yeah, we have to be held accountable. I don't think there's any legal action that we can take, and it's only up to you guys to hold us accountable, listen to what we say, and then watch our voting records, right? Every vote we take is public record. If that's Lynn, myself, or any of these three gentlemen, you can call us on it. So if you hear me say one thing at a time and then the next, and then go vote on a completely different issue, that's your job to vote us out and find a candidate who will run against us. So.
Alright, Senate candidates, we're going to give the House fellas a little bit of a break and start with you and work that way to try and make it a little more fair. Under annual discussion is 1% statewide sales tax. A portion of that, 3/8 of every cent, is called I will. This is Iowa's water and land legacy, and within that is language to obtain more public land. How do you feel about obtaining and maintaining more public ground?
I don't think we should enact that 3/8 cents. I don't think we should give them the additional resources to purchase land and take that out of what could be used for cattle and grazing, some tillage. What we're seeing, especially in this area, and I also know it's happening in Monona County, where young cattle are losing grazing land. They have a lease for this, and then it's sold, and then once it's turned over to the DNR, they're no longer allowed to use that. It puts a young farmer in a tough position, to be honest with you. I'm all for clean water. I use the DNR lands myself for hunting and recreation, but I do think there's a limit, and once the government owns that land, will you get it back? I don't think so. Okay, so also I don't want to stand in the way of anybody. You should have the ability to sell your land at the highest bidder if you're an owner. So it is a little bit of a dicey situation. And then there's one more piece in that. I think it's the Iowa Heritage Foundation actually goes out and purchases land and holds it until the DNR has it in the budget to buy that. And some of the sales transactions I've seen, they buy it at a higher rate and they sell it to the DNR at a lower rate. How you control that? Honestly, I'm sorry, I don't have the answer, but it's something that we definitely need to be looking into. I'm not opposed to the DNR land and public use land. I think those are great things. I do think there needs to be limits, though, especially if it's land that's being used for production.
So I would say this is a perfect example to talk about, specifically the abuse of bureaucracy in government, right? So the DNR in itself, I know people in the county that are more fearful of a DNR agent than a sheriff or a state trooper, and that says something. I don't think a government entity or bureau should have the authority to purchase land and outcompete Iowa citizens. How do we expect young farmers to get their start? If they just can get outbidded, they have, the DNR has deep pockets. They might not admit to it, but they do. They have state funding. But I think it opens up to another topic too, is how we manage land purchases from foreign entities and foreign countries coming in to compete with our Iowa farmers. I would be in support of legislation that would ban any company, LLC, or corporation backed by a foreign country or an entity to come in and compete with our farmers. And I think that also includes the DNR. I don't think the DNR should be able to purchase any more land. I think currently they should sell off all of the land they have up here and give it back to the farmers and let us naturally compete. So.
I'm not for it. I'm not for anything that would enable the government to steal more of our stuff. And I think that's kind of what's going on. Backdoor dealing via the government is something that I'm always suspicious of, and state troopers aren't that scary anyway, so. No, I mean, but seriously, I think that we need to take the bigger picture when it comes to this stuff. I echo what they've said over there. When the government takes something from you, they never give it back. And we have, I'm speaking my opinion here, but we have large players, large national players with lots of money buying up hordes of land in lots of Midwest states. The last thing we need is the government doing that, because I don't trust that the government isn't doing their bidding to begin with. And so I think perhaps a check and balance system, because I agree, I can't think of any legislation, actually, Anthony, you stole my idea. If the DNR wants to buy land, perhaps they should have to go through the state legislators. Maybe that would be a good checks and balance. They're a department, they're a state department, just like the Department of Public Safety is. They should have to, the legislators know what the state patrol does with our budget. The same should go for the DNR.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that, especially with what Lynn said. We were talking about that with Dennis here and the 6 a.m. boys a couple weeks ago. The main problem that I see, if you take that production, the farm production land out, then where does the tax burden fall? It falls on the rest of the farmers. So the more we turn over to the government, then it puts more burden on the regular farmers. And I think, especially in this economy with the Biden inflation going on, we can't put that extra burden on the farmers anymore. So.
And this topic is rising to the level of being raising our awareness at the legislature. This past year, we did have the House passed a bill, I don't know if the Senate did or not, which would require DNR to catalog all the land that they have control of in the state. So that would be a start. One of the biggest challenges to us in the legislature is actually getting hard data, and it isn't just in this area, it's in a lot of areas where we just don't have good data on what to make decisions. I don't support DNR, especially where they own a lot of land. And I toured Waterman Township, where DNR has been very active, and shaded in the areas where I could actually know that DNR controlled them or at least managed them. And there was over 3 sections in Waterman Township that was under DNR control, which is a terrific concentration. So, and it does impact the young farmers, it does impact the existing farmers, and it impacts everyone who pays taxes, because that land does not contribute to the valuation to raise money for your local governments.
Immigrant workers are vital to Iowa's workforce, particularly in our smaller communities. On both the state and federal level, immigration reform gets a lot of attention, but goes nowhere. Do you have an immigration reform plan if elected to our state legislature?
Well, I think obviously we've seen up here, especially at our dairies and a lot of our farms, they rely on immigrant work. I think it needs an overhaul. I think the entire system needs to be redone. You can't do that without the help of your federal legislators. So currently Randy Feenstra, Ashley Hinchins, Miller Meeks, I don't think Axon would jump on board, but we try to ask her. But I think specifically as legislators for this district, we have to go to them, work with them on a plan that's going to start at the border, right, and work the process currently what we have. I don't think the solution is rounding people up and sending them back to where they came from. It's fixing the broken system and how long it takes to become a citizen or go through the process. I would support some legislation where we enforce the current borders standard and we send troops to assist, but then work with our current communities, specifically on the ones working at these Tysons, Van Ness, and other places. I don't think the answer is then we have to deal with a huge labor shortage, and we're already dealing with that currently. So I would support some legislation to enforce the border states, send our money directly to them and not to the federal government, and then hopefully work with the House to pass the same legislation.
I think we have immigration laws on the books already, and I think they get ignored. So to think that creating new laws is going to fix the problem, you have to have the will to enforce the laws that you have currently on the books. And I'm not opposed to immigration reform. I think it's something that needs to be considered. I think anybody who comes into this country by legal means should be welcome. And we do need to be looking at our borders, doing something different there, making sure that they have the resources in those border states. But ultimately, if you're not going to obey the laws that you currently have on the books, why would we think that adding more laws is going to fix the problem?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is secure the borders, and that's not something that is an individual state can do. Governor has sent troopers down there to help, but that is a drain on the budget. And so, I mean, it needs to be addressed on the federal level, and then we need to make it easier and less costly for those workers who are here, those immigrants who are not citizens yet. Make it an easier path for them to get to citizenship. I've heard that it's tremendously expensive, especially for what they make, and also that the test, I've never had to take the test, but I've been told that if they gave it to those legislators, probably more than 50% of us would fail it, so I heard it's a difficult test. So I think it needs to be an easier route for those that are already here to obtain citizenship. We can't round them up and send them back because our economy just go to a standstill. We need workers so desperately.
I would agree with that. I'm pro mass arrest and anything and shipping everybody back. I think as far as the national border is concerned, it's an opportunity for the states to do what the states need to do and band together and do what's right when the federal government has failed. So if Texas wants to build a wall because the federal government's not going to, if Iowa wants to send troopers or National Guard folks down there for a short time, it's not a long-term solution, I understand, but anything to help beef up our borders, if states want to do that, I think that I'm okay with that. I'm also pro-enforcement of laws that we already have. I don't think that just making up new laws that nobody's going to follow is a solution. Making the route to citizenship cheaper, I think that breaking the law needs to come with some sort of repercussion. I don't think it's, again, mass incarceration and shipping everybody back to where they came from, but to perhaps make the road to citizenship cheaper and make it easier. I would concur with Mr. Bush on that. I've never seen a test either. But making that path easier, making the requirements easier, making it cheaper, so that way the punishment could be a fine that's levied against everybody who's here illegally, and then that's it. That's the punishment, and they stay. But there has to be some form of justice because laws have been broken, and that can't just simply be ignored. While on the other hand, I don't just agree with crippling our economy and sending everybody back. So if we're willing to humble ourselves and say maybe we make this path to citizenship a little bit easier and cheaper, so we can levy some sort of punishment and then just move on, I think that would be okay with me.
I was actually eating at McDonald's about a year ago, and there were two immigrants at the next table reviewing their test, and I asked to look it over, and it was pretty easy, actually. And I don't doubt Dennis's word, if 50% of the legislators can't pass the test, then that's saying something about them. If they do their basic American history and the American government, it's pretty easy. I'm a bit of a hardliner, and there's a reason for this. We had, I'm going to call them illegals, across the road from us for many years, and they seriously impacted impacted our quality of life. My wife and I are dog lovers, especially me. On more than one occasion, I had to pick up dead dogs off the road and either deliver them back to their place or take care of them myself because they just would not take care of them. I would often joke that she had a heart of gold, the lady across the street from us. She liked to pick up stray dogs, but she let her neighbors, us, take care of them. And so they were always at our place because they were always gone. After the 2016 summer rally, we had a Trump flag on our window, and we found out from their son, who was friends with my wife's son, they didn't like that because if Trump won, they would have to pay more money to the coyotes to smuggle them across the border. And on multiple occasions, they were gone for a week or 2 weeks at a time, and those dogs were not being taken care of or even fed a lot of times. So I'd have to go over there, spend my own money, and feed them. Sometimes they would put a bucket out in the middle of the yard and just put dry food in there. Well, what happens when it rains? Of course, the food is ruined and the dogs are starving. So another time, my wife heard the mother dog get hit by a car and killed. These puppies, they had 9 puppies. They were in the doghouse. I had to crawl in and save them and make sure they got to the Humane Society in Milford. So I'm against illegal immigrants, needless to say.
Many have relocated to capitalize on the opportunity to grow cannabis. Do you support the legalization of marijuana and it in turn providing revenue to the state? And do you feel people leaving the state to capitalize on the opportunity to be problematic?
So I have some experience, talk specifically, I worked in the State House with a member of the legislature who worked on passing and legalizing the growth of hemp in the state and CBD. The one thing as a young person, it's all over. We see it, for us to ignore it and say, oh, it's just not there in our communities, I think is ignorant. But specifically, I think we should change the way the laws are currently on the books, right? Especially with young people. I think the people who are bringing it into our communities, throw them in jail, throw away the key. But I think destroying a young person's life because they got caught with weed at 18 or 17 years old, I think we should put them to work. Specifically, I see that with the younger generation when they're forced to work, going and taking a course on why marijuana is bad for them doesn't really do the job. But putting in physical, backbreaking work, painting the streets, painting fences, whatever it is to improve the community, I think goes a long way. So I think we change our look on how we deal with youth in cannabis. I'm not for legalizing marijuana in the state. I've seen it firsthand. I got to travel to Illinois and Colorado with former state representative Jared Klein, and it just does not bring in the money that they say it does. And what it does is it brings in low-life degenerates into the community who want to use that and capitalize on relocating. Another specific thing I would like to see is that when it comes to CBD and marijuana, that the people who are given approval, those profits stay in the state. They're not going to major corporations that are not located in Iowa, because then they're not putting it back into the community. So I think, no, I'm not in favor of legalizing marijuana, but I am in favor of writing new legislation specifically geared to handling young people with it.
I can't support legalizing recreational marijuana. I have relatives that live out in Colorado, and when they legalized marijuana out there, it brought a number of social issues, rising domestic abuse, and other things. You can check that out yourself. I don't think it has a place in our state. As far as medical marijuana goes, yeah, I think there's some very good medical uses potentially for that, if it's under the direction of a doctor. I wouldn't have a problem with CBD oil or marijuana use for medical reasons under the direction of a doctor with a prescription, but not some of the things you've seen in other states where they can skirt that and get a prescription of some kind that's not maybe justified and go ahead and purchase marijuana. Pretty strict controls over it, I guess is what I'm saying, but no to recreational marijuana, absolutely not.
The subject came up of us on Sunday, so yeah, we're all against recreational marijuana. But I am open to seeing what can be done as far as medicinal. I think there are some very legitimate uses for medicinal marijuana.
I'll quickly concur with that. My opinion has changed on the medicinal aspect of it. I've talked to people who have benefited greatly from it, and so I think that that could be an opportunity that we explore. However, I think that as a culture, we have to accept the consequences to abusing that. 2 years ago, I arrested between 10 and 12 drunk drivers, and all of them were drug. Not a single one was alcohol related. All of it was drug involved. And so I think that the culture would be blown away by the amount of half-baked people driving around. And that's not a joke. I don't say that tongue-in-cheek either. The amount of people that I run into that are half in the bag because they're not smoking weed, they're doing meth. They're not doing meth, they're abusing opiates. If they're not abusing opiates, it's a combination of the 3 or 4. So I think that what we have to understand that is if this is an issue that the people want, right, we're a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and if the people come and say, okay, recreational marijuana, maybe that could be a thing for us. And we have to understand that, as Mr. LaBruna was alluding to a little bit earlier, the consequences for that offense have to be there. The average person arrested for OWI first gets a slap on the wrist, maybe a weekend in jail whenever they have a weekend free, and then they're out the door and then that's it. That can't be a thing anymore. If you want to approach the issue of even legalizing some form of marijuana, there has to be a consequence for abusing it. Because the abuse of narcotics and drugs already is skyrocketing. So I say that just to say, I'm open to medical marijuana. I think it has a lot of uses for a lot of people, and I think that's a good thing, and we should explore that. But we have to understand the dangers that come along with approaching that topic. So.
Medical marijuana is already allowed in the state of Iowa, but what I'm seeing as a legislator since I've been elected is that the board that oversees that is constantly asking that we raise the limit of THC in the marijuana they're allowed to use. So and I don't know that raising that the symptoms that they're trying to alleviate would require that level of concentration of THC. So I know that there's good data that says that medical marijuana does alleviate some symptoms, especially in cancer patients, and there's some other things. People experience great pain and they can't find another avenue to treat that. I can never support the recreational use of marijuana. I've been very involved in mental health since being elected as supervisor, and the data that I've seen is that marijuana has, if there are people who use it fairly regularly, marijuana has an adverse effect on the development of the brain. And it doesn't clear your system in a day or a week or a month. If you use it, it can affect your ability to retain information for up to 2 years. So it is, I just can't support using that. And there are a number of people who think the marijuana that we're talking about is the marijuana that was back in the 60s and 70s, and it's not it. The amount of THC in the purity of that in the current marijuana is 4 to 8 times higher. And then they get into what they call dabbing, which is a concentrated THC, which has got another whole set of very serious problems in that. Anybody using that product too. So I can't support going down that path at all.
And just be clear, 1 second, I am in the negative. I don't think I made that clear. I am in the negative for legalizing recreational marijuana.
What legislation in Iowa would you support to protect against federal overregulation and interference in free trade?
Well, I think that it hits the mark on some of the stuff I did at the White House. Specifically, I mean, what we see going on, and I'll attest, I won't name names, but you see Iowans when I was at the White House lobbying my staff to put Chinese corporations and other corporations from Russia and other countries off the entity list. If you know what the entity list is, it is a group of companies deemed by the United States government that they cannot do business here in the US. Well, we have a couple powerful Iowans that were lobbying my office, and I remember being flabbergasted. I was like, you're lobbying on behalf of this? Why? It's not on the president's agenda. He's against these companies. Well, you know, I can offer you a job at the end of this administration, so I think it's really cleaning some of these people out of Des Moines to start it all off. If we want to capitalize on some of our things, we need a new regime. We need new people who are going to be there, who can't be controlled by the mighty dollar, and are not there for their personal benefits. Legislation-wise, I think banning those foreign companies from coming in who are backed by China or Russia from purchasing farmland from our farmers and outcompeting them. They have endless pockets. They can outcompete any of our farmers no matter how wealthy they are. Two, to specifically kind of talk about is they're trying to control the food, the way we grow our food. I mean, China's #1 consumer of pork and soybean in the world, and if they can get to that middleman and get rid of the Iowa farmer, get rid of the Midwest farmer, I would follow legislation that would ban them from being able to compete. Indiana's done something like it. I don't think it's extreme enough. They give them up to 3% of land. I'd say 0. And so that's legislation I would bring in on the first day of our 100-day session, is banning companies backed by foreign countries from purchasing Iowa soil.
Yeah, I have a short answer. I agree wholeheartedly with that. We don't need foreign influence coming in, buying our land and taking it out from underneath our local farmers and taking it and controlling that. And, yeah, that would be right away. No foreign countries, especially countries like China, that would want to come in and bid up our land and buy it out from underneath the farmers.
There actually was a bill floating around the legislature this year that would require any land that was owned by anyone associated with China to sell that land, and it would have prohibited China from purchasing any land in Iowa. I don't know what happened to it. It was floating around and then disappeared. I would support any type of legislation in that regard. Another way, which really isn't legislative, but we need a strong Attorney General that's going to side with other Republican Attorney Generals and push back on anything that comes out of Washington, D.C. or on some of these other states. This question don't specifically talk about, I think it's Proposition 13 in California, which will try to dictate how we raise our local livestock. And to me, that's an interference of free trade. I don't know quite how that is allowed to go forward. The governor did side with other Republican governors and pushing back on that. But we need a strong Attorney General that will stand up and side with others and you know, basically take the federal government to court.
For me, as I think about the issue, it's a cultural issue. I think that as Americans, we speak out of both sides of our mouth when it comes to what we want the government involved in and what we don't want the government involved in. I think the government needs to stay out of our state's business anytime the government involves itself in the market at all. I think it prohibits free trade. So what do I mean? Talking out of both sides of our mouth. We can't say, government, stay out of my life with one hand, and then say, government, you go tell that guy to buy my stuff. No. Free market is free market. Free market is competition. If you want somebody to buy your product, then it better be a good product for somebody to buy. It's not the government's job to come in and tell somebody to buy your stuff. That is hypocritical in my opinion, and it's a cultural shift that needs. The cultural shift that needs to happen is the government. You stay out of my life, period. You stay out of my neighbor's life, and you stay out of my brother's life, and you stay out of my sister's life. Free market trade comes from competition. Free market trade comes from people who are innovating and smart and entrepreneurs who are creating an environment where the best guy wins out. And I think that we have gotten to become a culture where again, just the analogy that I'll use is just talking out of both sides of our mouth. If you want the government to stay out of your life and not take your land over here, then you can't go tell the government, go do this so this guy buys my stuff over here. It's just that's not how it works. That's not the government staying out of our lives. That's us using the government for what we want.
Put up your book, Zach.
Yeah.
Should I noticed earlier you had a book on Milton Friedman, and Milton Friedman's point is he's not pro-business, he's not pro-consumer, he's pro-freedom. And just to piggyback on what Zach said, yes, we don't want the government to be picking and choosing who we can choose. I understand it's a very legitimate concern as far as foreign companies and foreign entities coming in and buying our land, but I think it's more important that we stand for freedom.
How can Iowa protect its farm to food to table system of production, processing, and distribution?
I think it kind of speaks to what I just said about, one, taking care of all these major corporations that are going to come in and compete with our local farmers. We've seen drastically, specifically in our district, the amount of people who own their own hog operations dwindle. I think it's 20 we have left in the district. So that's Clay County, Buena Vista, Osceola, Bryan, and Cherokee. So I think that says something. I would push for young farmers to get more involved. I would want to get rid of some of the misuse of agricultural subsidies. What I'm talking about it specifically is when someone who's not a farmer applies for a subsidy, gets that subsidy, and then doesn't use it for agriculture issues, that hurts my district, that hurts our communities. I then also think these major corporations like Tyson's and others who are coming into the area have to put more into the community and not expect more tax credits and tax benefits. Obviously we want them up here, and I think that is also by diversifying what we currently have up here with manufacturing and agriculture. Giving workers an opportunity to pick from something else, and allowing the people who are currently working in the ag industry to continue to use those workers and not be outbidded based off salary and other things.
I think also it's about supporting regional businesses, industries that produce value-added products locally, and creating markets for our grain, markets for our cattle and our hogs. The meat packers, you have a concentration of meat packers, whether they're 4 or 5 that control the entire industry, and producers are operating at a margin because of that. I think bringing competition in would be a good thing. And just like the Platinum Crush that's going in Buena Vista County, that's going to be a great market for soybeans. It's a modern facility. It's going to add jobs. We need more regional industry for our grain, and for our cattlemen, and for our hog producers, and help us control the market a little bit better.
Of course, we support our farmers, and we should. My hesitancy, though, is the word protect. Once you make a deal with government, it's really hard to get that back. I used this example the other day, and you guys probably get sick of me saying this, but there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. So it's kind of like dealing with the mafia. Are you sure you want to make that deal? But yes, we obviously need to support our farmers, and what Zach said, I just want to piggyback on that. The best thing we can do is eliminate the inheritance tax. My wife and I were talking about that on the way here. It's not fair that farmers have to sell off their land if they want to try to keep it in the family to give it to their sons or grandsons or grandchildren. So I think we need to eliminate that, and that is one way we can support the next generation of farmers.
So I think the role of a good leader and a legislator is knowing when he's not the expert matter on something, and he goes back to the people that put him in office, and he asks the questions. And so I'm not a farmer. I've never been a farmer. I've never owned farmland. I have 4 acres on an acreage that is not tillable. And so can't even grow garden. So I'm going to defer to the farmer on this. I'm going to because that's what a good leader does. I'm not going to sit here and smooze anybody, because you guys would see right through that. I will say that bottom line, I think that for a free market to flourish and the farm chain to be protected is for the government to stay out of it. You guys know how to produce a good product. You guys know how to produce and create the ingenuity that's going to create a better environment for you guys to do your job, and that's your guys' job to do that. And be the experts, not the government. I would also say that I think a lot of these questions are related in the sense that we are raising up a culture that doesn't want to work, that isn't educated, period, in my opinion. And so how do we protect the chain? We create more farmers. We create more people that want to do what a lot of people in this room already want to do. And unfortunately, we've created a culture where all children want to do is grow up, get a piece of paper, get into a bunch of debt, and go work in a job that doesn't make them any money at all, because that's just what we've raised them to do. So let's educate our children in hard work and going out and getting a job that's going to make money and put dollars into the local economy, and not just think they have to run off and get a meaningless piece of paper. So a lot of these questions are all related to me. So, but I'm not going to punt, but I am going to try to be a good leader and defer to the experts on that. And so I look forward to talking to farmers on how we can protect that chain. So.
Although the question doesn't really state it, I think it kind of in the background is about market access. We've got 4 major packers controlling the cattle industry, and about the same number controlling the hog industry. On the state level, what we can do is to promote more regional packing plants. The smaller ones, we have one down in Council Bluffs that they're trying to get off the ground. There's one in central Iowa that's processing 400 to 500 head a day. That does help at least get access to those of us that are still independents. And there are some things that we can do with the legislature in terms of economic development funds to get these entities up and try to get them running, to help, particularly in the livestock processing, to train people who can work in the butchery industry. We've done quite a bit of work on that this past 2 sessions, having the Iowa State Startup Butchery, basically a program to teach butchering skills. Done quite a bit also with trying to help existing packing plants or existing lockers upgrade their facilities, maybe process more local livestock than what they're able to now. So those are the ways to help that. Otherwise, the other answers are on the national level, and I mean, I'm hearing a lot about free markets, and we let the free market go. And I'm going to go back to history. How did that work for the people back in the era of Standard Oil and the Rockefellers? And how did that work back in the steel industry, with Carnegie's? It's a balance, and I found that, as a legislator, there's always a balance. You can't just completely pull back and let people have free reign, because the big guys are just going to trample everybody else, and pretty soon they start trampling each other, and you're going to end up with 1 or 2 controlling everything. So most everything we do, you're trying to strive for a balance between how much should we do, how much don't we want to do, and we try to protect the free market as much as we can.
Okay, we have 2 more questions that we have prepared. If we have time after that, we have had 3 that were submitted here when people walked in, but just a few more minutes. Should eminent domain be extended to non-utility entities, for example, pipeline construction and other for-profit endeavors?
No.
No, I mean, I'm against eminent domain. I think coming in and being able to say, just as someone who's dealt with bureaucracy, you don't have the right to just come in and take someone's land for any issue, I believe. I think any issue, you have to sit down, negotiate for that price, and if they want to sell, they sell. If they don't, too bad. I'll say this, there's an eminent domain bill in the Senate, Senate File 2160. Our current senator pushed that bill pretty hard, but there's issues, right? There's leadership, there's big-time Republican donors, and they squashed that bill because they benefit most. And so up here in rural Iowa, get pushed to the back. And so if I made it to the Senate, I would support that bill, Senate File 2160 fully. I think it's important to support our other senators up here in the rural area and help them basically battle back against leadership who answers to other individuals like major Republican donors. And that's just my stance, so no.
I was being a little comical there, so what do I get to mine? This is a private funded project largely, and they should not be afforded the same rights to eminent domain as for public utilities. It's simple as that. If they want to go through your land, they should negotiate with the farmer fair price or better. And if they can't get the farmers to sell, they need to find another route. Simple as that.
I'm going to say yes and no, and I'm going to tell you why. All of your anhydrous comes up via pipeline by private industry. All of your gasoline, all of your diesel fuel comes up through a pipeline, private industry. All your natural gas, Northern Natural Gas, Midwest Energy comes up into our area, and they're a private industry, for-profit industry. So to say unequivocally that no one should be able to use eminent domain for a company that is for-profit, I think is a mistake. I did co-sponsor a bill which would have required 90% or more voluntary landowner participation before the IUB should be able to grant eminent domain. And I think there should be some protections to where pipelines don't come so close to established farmsteads that it would prevent them from expanding in the future. But I think there is a threshold, and maybe 90% isn't enough, but I think there's a threshold at some point where you have to say, we need to allow it. So, I guess that's where I stand on it. And there's, I don't think there's any large pipeline project that can ever happen, or any type of project that is for profit that could ever happen if you required 100% participation, voluntary participation.
Natural gas heats our home, water quenches our thirst. The carbon capture pipeline is Green New Deal nonsense, in my opinion, and isn't something that's probably even necessary. And so that's a little, to me personally, it's a little bit of a strong man to say natural gas, water, or other things that were mentioned, because those things are things that I need to heat my home. I don't need carbon to be taken out of the air and pumped into the ground. We're setting precedents now, and this is something that I think that we have to remember. It goes back to a lot of things that we've talked about. We set precedents when we do stuff like this. We set precedents when we take money and give up our ground. If it's a mutual exchange, I have no business in giving you advice or telling you what to do, but remember, you set precedents. That dollar has got a string attached to it. That pipe is never going to come out of the ground, and there's always going to be somebody that's going to have to come and work on it or whatever. So I'm absolutely against the abuse of eminent domain, especially in something like this. I think the for-profit part of it is the most dangerous to me. I would say the land being taken is the most dangerous to me, but a very close second to that is a for-profit that is just right in line with Green New Deal stuff that is coming down from the federal government, that they're pushing on all these states. These carbon credits are going to California? No. Like, if it's something that everybody is going to benefit, like water or sewage or natural gas to heat your home, let's have that conversation, but this is not that, and I'm against it.
It's a little bit more complicated, but it's a public utility, but obviously a private company. But I'm a big fan of John Stossel's, and I know he's done some work on this, that you cannot use eminent domain for private companies, so I'm just totally against that. I do know, though, that the company is willing to negotiate with not willing to do that. That's not true. And I do like what Dennis said about we should get 90% agreement on that before they are allowed to do that. But I think it, just piggyback on what Zach said, I think it just opens up a big can of worms that once you open that precedent, the government will take full advantage of that.
What is your opinion on authorizing the state of Iowa to affirm or oppose a constitutional convention?
So, I think the state of Iowa and Iowans will voice their opinion on the Constitutional Convention. I think it's dangerous. I think opening the Constitution to allow the Democrats, right, it's a math problem, basically. We have to ensure that the states that are there, that are going to be working with us if we do vote to go to a Constitutional Convention, that the mob from California and New York are not just going to open the entire Constitution and change everything. So I think that's something that personally, that's what I fear for, is if we don't play it right, and Republicans are notorious, we don't play it right. There is a way that if we would like to make some changes, I think I'm all for it. But again, I think with how the current system is, I think it's too volatile to open the Constitution without the risk of them changing everything. And I think that's why, as Iowans, we start with our Constitution, we add amendments, things that we want to put here in the state of Iowa and that holds true to our hearts. And when the times are right, maybe with a new presidency, maybe with a House and a Senate, both in Republican control and in Washington, then we can have that discussion. I think right now, currently with our president, who doesn't know what's going on, with a vice president who laughs at everything, and a Congress who is just fighting each other, I think it's a little too risky. But I'm open to it. I think we start with ourselves, and then let's see where the wind takes us.
If I understand correctly, you need 34 states, is that correct? And the only thing that can be on the table is what was put on the petition, and the petitions all have to be worded similarly. So, I trust the Constitution, I trust our founding fathers that they knew what they were doing when they put that in there. Now, would I personally push for Article 5, Convention of the States? No, because I don't know enough about it, to be honest with you right now. But there's a reason that's in there. And part of it is that, as we talked earlier, that balance of power between the federal government and the state government, and allows us one more avenue that we can go in and do something like a balanced budget amendment. It would be an example. So I guess I don't have fear of it. I just don't know enough about it to say that I would go in there and fight for it. But I kind of understand how it works, and I'm pretty sure you have to just stay with what was on the petition. Petitions all have to be similar. So there are some rails in place.
I'm open to the idea of it, but what I fear is that the cure is going to be worse than the disease. And yeah, we all know how screwed up Washington is. But believe it or not, we've had the most stable government in the world for the last 240 years. So I'm certainly open to hearing what the procedure is and how that all works, but I'm hesitant to actually go through with it without seeing what's going to be on the agenda.
What I've learned about the Constitutional Convention, at this point, I would not be for it. For some of the things said already, I understand the frustration and the sentiment. Don't mistake me for saying I think that everything is okay. I think it's not. But this is why we invest in our local elections. This is why we invest in our states, pushing back against the federal government and using their sovereignty under the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that gives the states explicit power and rights and things that the U.S. Constitution does not explicitly say. I want to see states push back first. I want to see local elections changed and pushed back first. I think there's a reason why we haven't had a constitutional convention, or it hasn't been brought up since 1787, which is the only convention that our country has ever called. From what I've learned, and this is the biggest thing that makes me afraid, is the states can call for the game, but the federal government still referees the game. And we just came off of an election
I've gotten a lot of email on this, and I've tried to study it as much as I could. What I can tell you is that the emails I'm getting in support of it are coming from mostly within Iowa and within the Midwest, and the ones that are arguing against it are coming from both coasts, and I don't really trust the agenda on either of those coasts. So I'm a little hesitant then to dismiss the idea. It takes 2/3 of the states to call for it, the Congress to call a constitutional convention, and whatever comes out of that convention requires a ratification by 3/4 of the states. So there seems to be protection there. I think the fear is that everything is in the open once they call a constitutional convention, even though we've been told that we can give the delegates from each state specific instructions on what they can discuss, and that we could have the power to basically recall any delegate that strayed from that directive. But I think the fear is that they'll go in and they'll change the requirements as far as the 3/4 to ratify, and then you'll have a runaway convention and change the rules so drastically we can't, we don't have that safeguard. So I'm still studying it. I'm kind of leaning towards it. What we have now is really tearing the country apart. If we go back to when colonies were first founded, none of the 13 colonies trusted each other, and they developed a system called federalism and had some regulations to where the states had quite a lot of power.
All right, we will give you one last pre-prepared question, and then we're going to grab one of the ones that was brought up, I think, to close the evening as we are approaching 9 o'clock. What is your take on tax increment funding?
I'm for, so the way I look at it is like, just because it's good for Republicans and Iowans down in Des Moines does not mean it's good for us up here. I think having increments and brackets specifically do help some of our people in the communities. I know I've talked to a lot of moms and dads who work both jobs. The kids have to stay at home alone, and I think that is kind of looking at how our youth is growing, and we need that relationships where a mom or father is at the household with the child. So I would be for, I think, what was the House dropped it from 4.3.9, right, Dennis? So I would be for brackets to be brought back. I know amendments have been pushed. I know some Republicans in the House pushed for it as well, but I believe the amendments did not make the bill. And in final closing, the thing that's most important is that there's an open discussion on the Senate or the House floor, and voices to be heard. And so I would be for bringing some of those back. Again, I don't think just because it's good for Des Moines makes it good for our district.
So can you repeat the question? Because I don't know that we addressed it correctly. Are you talking about TIF? Financing? Okay, I'll let you have another shot. Okay. I didn't hear it right the first time, and then when Anthony started talking about it, I thought, he didn't hear it right either, so yeah. You know, TIF takes property off the tax rolls, so that what it does is it increases the taxes for the rest of the property taxes for the rest of us. And so you have to understand that when it's being used. I'm not necessarily opposed to it. It should be, I think, locally controlled myself. The state, on a large part, needs to stay out of those local decisions for TIF districts. If there's a definite benefit to the community, as a superintendent, you assume that we stand against TIFs because it takes money away from some of the school funding too. But I wasn't always opposed to it. If it was to bring industry or business, something like a industrial park or those type of new housing development, I would stand very much in favor of it. But from a state level, I think most TIF districts need to be left to the local counties and city governments to take care of and make those decisions. Just my personal opinion.
I thought she was talking about the tax brackets that they got rid of in the amendments. So everybody I've talked to, especially some of the people in Sheldon and some of our city managers, they're for not touching TIFs. I think it's huge as local control. I think with local control, they're going to know what best suits for their community, allowing them to have that opportunity, and then obviously the role it plays in child care up here. And that's a huge thing we have to talk about. There are grants that are going into child care, but again, I do say what's great for Des Moines does not mean it's great for us. So you're going to have pushback from senators in Des Moines and House members in Des Moines who it benefits for them to get rid of it or not support it. Where us having it in the local communities making the decisions by our local leaders, it's better for us. So I'm in favor of that.
I'm well aware of TIF as a former county supervisor. TIFs, when they were originally established, were for two reasons. One was for cities to address blighted areas where they could lock in basically in a TIF, you lock in the valuation before the improvement, and then the improvement happens, and you use the monies that you would have received in taxes, you use them to pay off whatever debt was incurred to improve that area. And other way that it was originally intended for was that when an industry came in and needed infrastructure, say they needed roads, or they needed sewer, or they needed water, and the county or the city could not borrow enough to meet that, they could, or wouldn't be able to help them in a sufficient way to make that project happen. So like when an ethanol plant comes in and they need a road, we can TIF the area that the plant's going in that locks in that valuation. They can build the new valuation. We can pay off the road. We can pay off, the water, access to water, or their access to natural gas. I don't think we use it for natural gas. For the natural utility. But it's been expanded out to where every economic development director for every project will come and ask the Board of Supervisors or the city for the area to be TIF'd. And I guess that's where I have a problem. The thing is, it's across the whole United States, and unless we change it across the whole United States, we've got to play by the rules that are currently in place. So I wish that on the federal level they would ban it. It's cutthroat. When you have communities, and industry knows that, they'll play a community against another community all the time as to how much tax money or how much tax rebate you get, and it's all financed off of it. TIFs need to be sunsetted. I think that's...
I would just simply add to some of that it's why local elections and local control is important. As long as it's something, because it does add to the cost of the taxpayer, as long as it's something that doesn't become a runaway train, then it needs to be up to that local community on how those things are, what those things are spent on and what that, and how those things are issued out. I don't have a problem with the state being involved in a sense that restricts how to use it or what it could be used on, so that it become a snowball effect on everything. But that's why, to me, because I'm not an expert matter in TIF, and it's something that I've talked to mayors and economic development people about, the communities that I've talked to them in, they seem to be a useful tool for them, but it's not a one-size-fits-all thing either. So if it works for Sheldon, it might not work for somebody else. So as long as it doesn't become the snowball effect, this runaway train of just upping everybody's taxes so we can pay for a daycare, as long as the community is okay with how that's being used and the local control is still there, then that comes back on that community.
I'm just going to agree with that. As long as it is local control, then that's fine. But I think probably both the guys over there said what's good for Des Moines is not good for here in Northwest Iowa. So that's all I have to say on that.
All right, in closing, I'm going to ask one of these questions as sort of your closing argument, if you will, and then constituents constituents in the seats. If you would like, I think the candidates will maybe stick around to answer some individual questions. Or have we scared you all away? All right. And we'll start with the House, give you guys a little break in the Senate. What uniquely qualifies you for the office you are seeking?
I'll grab it first. I love the fact that you brought the Milton Friedman book. Milton Friedman once said, there are 4 ways to spend money. You can spend your own money on yourself. You can spend your own money on somebody else. You can spend someone else's money on yourself. And you can spend someone else's money on somebody else. If we're the legislator, we're going to be obviously spending somebody else's money on somebody else. And so that makes us stewards. We have to be stewards of the money. And that's your money, everybody's money here. And so I think that's the most important thing that a person can do if they're going to serve. We have to spend our money wisely, and I think that's what's happened in the last 8 to 10 years. Once Republicans have gotten in control of the governorship and the legislature, we've turned a huge deficit into a surplus. And I think that's what can happen here. And I do love the fact that we've gone to a flat tax at 3.9%. And I think that will lead to more economic growth. Now, about me personally, I think between my work experience and my experience following politics the last 25 plus years, I think I'm uniquely qualified as I've observed not just what's happening in California and how California has gone terrible, but I've also experienced other parts of the world and other parts of the country. I see what happens when people turn to socialism, and obviously we don't need that here. And so my main theme is government, less government is better. We need to establish God in our personal lives and our public lives. And of course, we need to be good stewards of our money. So, thank you.
Tom has used my book more than I am. I'm pretty proud of it, so. Just kidding. I'm going to read a little bit out of it, just like 2 seconds. Milton Friedman was asked the question, why do you believe that this country is not getting the government it wants when the Democrats control practically all the legislative bodies? So the federal government right now. And he talks about Reagan. He said Reagan was a real aberration in that sense. He was the first president in my lifetime who was elected not because he was saying what the people wanted to hear, but because the people had come around to wanting to hear what he was saying. I think that describes us from the very beginning. We started running because we saw a wicked nation running out of control, and I didn't want my kids to be a part of that. You can trust me with this office because I'm a firebrand Christian conservative who fears God with a worldview and with a godly worldview that interprets every single decision that I make. I have children who are going to have to live in the world that I have helped to create for them. I have skin in the game, as they say. I would also note that for the last 10 years, and 6 of those being my work experience with TAC team stuff and SWAT team operations, I'm used to making hard decisions with no time. Thankfully with the legislators, we have a little bit more time than 2 seconds to make decisions, but I have already given my life and have sworn to protect the Constitution of our state and the United States of America for the last 10 years of my life. You can trust me to continue to do that now. I leave my family, I leave my place of safety, I leave my children to defend you for 5 days a week. You can guarantee that's what I'm going to do again, and again, and again, and again when I'm down in Des Moines. I have your best interests in mind because they're my best interests. I don't want my freedoms taken away because I don't want your freedoms taken away.
Well, the one unique thing that I bring is that I've got a track record. I mean, if you want to know how I've been voting, go back and look at the journal for the House for the last 2 years, you know exactly where I stand. So that, in a way, makes me unique. 2 years ago, my wife and I were ready to retire. We bought a motorhome, we were going to go south, bicycle, and down in Arizona. It was warm. We didn't envision walking across that cold parking lot down in Des Moines into the State House. Middle of January and February. And there were 2 reasons I ran. One was because of my background in mental health. And right at the time when I had to make a decision, when our former representative retired and I had to make a decision, I got a newsletter came out of the Capitol, came out of the House Republicans. And what I was hearing about mental health wasn't what I was seeing on the ground. And so I primarily went down there to advocate for mental health services. And the other thing that is also important to me, I'm a lifelong farmer. I have family that farms, my son still farms, I still actively farm. And I understand agriculture. Agriculture is the lifeblood for House District 5. And we need someone who understands agriculture. We need someone who will advocate for agriculture with knowledge. So, and that's why I ended it. Those are the two reasons. And farthest from my mind was that I would ever be down in the State House now at my age. But I do have experience. I have county government experience. I have school board experience. I did serve a brief time as commissioner for veteran affairs at the county level. Have a lot of experience as far as how mental health services are being provided in the state. And I'm a strong advocate for that. And I believe some of the issues we're seeing in our schools directly relate to mental health services that are being provided in our schools. And I'm very happy to see that responsibility is given to the mental health regions, because they're controlled by your elected officials and county supervisors.
I'm running because Northwest Iowa is my home. I met my wife here. I was raised here. Graduated from high school, so was my wife, right here in Northwest Iowa. We did move away for a while, but when we started having a young family, we couldn't wait to get back to Northwest Iowa and raise our kids just the way that my wife and I were raised, where you had the ability to ride your bike to the park or walk to school. You didn't have to have play dates set up by mom and dad. The quality of life here is second to none. I've been showing up for Northwest Iowa all my life. I've served school districts that cover 4 counties in this district. Started 3 daycares in 3 different communities. Set up 2 community foundations. I've been showing up for Northwest Iowa all my life. If I'm elected as your next state senator, I'll continue to show up for Northwest Iowa. Thanks.
So I wasn't originally born and raised here, but you know, when I had a choice to come back, I chose Northwest Iowa. I have a proven conservative track record. I worked for the 2 most hated men in the Republican Party, Congressman Steve King, who was hated by the Republican establishment for what he stood for, and President Donald Trump, and I've been called every name in the book, and that's never stopped me from believing in and holding the principles that I currently hold. So when it comes to the hard votes, the tough decisions, I have that proven track record where I will not break. I think I can be a new, young voice for Iowans up here. I think it takes someone who knows how to deal with the party, deal with the mess of being in committees, and this is something Dennis is experiencing, and Senator Taylor. It's not easy to push legislation, but I have. I did it as a clerk. I did pass major legislation for the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, and then went out to Washington and did the same thing. And during my entire time, my young 24 years, I've served 11 years serving people. And that's why I got into this business. I want to be a voice for somebody and everybody up in this district and actually be effective. I can promise I'm going to go down and do A, B, C, and D, but if you can't be effective, you can't make a difference for your community. And it takes the knowledge of dealing with people like this. And at 22 years old, firing a 60-year-old person, 50-year-old person who's been using and abusing the system, that takes guts, that takes a backbone, and that's what I have. And so if I'm elected your next senator, I'll do it humbly, and I know I do not know everything, but I will turn to the stakeholders in the district, I will ask for your opinions, I will ask for your input, and I will lead through a group dynamic, and then I'll turn to the gentleman here in the House seat that will be companioning either Lynn or I, and we'll work together. I think that's major importance. When we go up, we don't talk to each other. I see it a lot of the times. We have to work together to make an impact for our district and our district first, then carry out what the party wants.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you giving us your time to go through these questions and answer thoughtfully. As mentioned, if you guys want to maybe corner them, just kidding, don't corner them, but ask some more questions to them individually. I think we can do that now.
If we give them the option to come back, if any of you guys have to run, I mean, I don't think we're going to work that. You guys need water? I'm almost ready. I just think we're too questions.
Be told if we've got some questions, we'll take 2 of them.
Thank you, gentlemen, for showing up here. Appreciate you being here. First of all, I gotta say, moderator's got some boots. I mean, those are some classic caliber. This is kind of a born and raised Houston kind of person. It's great to see you here, considering what this town used to be years ago, and considering now you're sitting in a fertilizer shed, doing a bunch of questions and answers. I have a coffee shop in Polina. I like to spend about a week with you guys asking questions and having you refer to answers. But anyway, a question that a lot of people have come up with, and something that wasn't addressed with tonight, was the possibility of term limits. And it's something that has come to mind time and time again. And we look at the people that are in Congress now, that maybe should or shouldn't be there, but the direction of our country is being directed by people who have been there for a long time. No new answers, a lot of questions, but we need a change. How do we get there?
Hi, sir.
Thank you.
I don't think our system of government was set up for career politicians. I could be wrong, but I don't think that was the original intent. I truly believe that our government was set up to be represented by our neighbors, people that work in our communities, that go down and represent us. And they do that for a period of time, and then they go back to what they did before. Now, in some respects, the people who argue that you don't need term limits, they say we have term limits because you can vote out of office. But we also know that it's awfully difficult to unseat an incumbent. They tend to have access to resources that somebody that's trying to run against them oftentimes don't have. So, in that respect, I am in favor of term limits. I don't know what those term lengths would be. I think that's a discussion that we all need to be having. But I don't think the intent was that you serve your entire career as a politician.
I'll agree with that. I'm for term limits, but obviously currently the system, we have one of the oldest sitting senators in the Senate. He is the oldest sitting senator. And if you try to put attempt to run against him, it's very hard, and that's because he has the political machine working with him. Realistically, I think where the discussion held, you ask, where do we make a difference? How do we start? I don't think that's specifically with term limits. I think what it is getting rid of dark money in politics, right? We're the Republicans, we're the ones that fall for this. Newt Gingrich is the one who put the party pay system together. Something Dennis has experienced, Senator Taylor is experiencing. You have to pay to be on the committee. And each committee is A, B, C, or D, right? And then you have to elect your majority leader. Each one of these members is expected to raise a certain amount of money. right? And I'll use Congressman Steve King as an example. Steve didn't play that game. Congressman King would not fundraise for his seats, right? So at the end of the day, he's a pain in Kevin McCarthy's side because he is technically looking at our congressman from the 4th District saying, he can't raise me money, right? So I'm not going to put him on the A, B, C, or D committees. He's going to go to the very end. So I want to replace that member with someone who's going to be a cash cow. That's our first policy. Get rid of the money in politics. Then go after the leadership. Go after leadership. Every time we have majority leaders, speakers of the House, assistant leaders, who don't push the Republican agenda the moment they get there because they're looking for their next office seat. So I think, yes, I understand your policy with term limits, but I just don't think that fixes the solution for it. I think it's getting rid of money and then holding the establishment. And I'll close with this. When you elect a member, if that's either Lynn or myself, or one of these fine gentlemen to the right, we have to come home to you guys. And if we don't have the local town and supporting community, then we ourselves won't be able to go make a difference because we need to make those hard votes against leadership and still be able to...
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will ask that we remain respectful in the back. I know it's getting late, but if we could maybe keep the chatter down, it's echoing up here a little bit.
I'm going to agree with the money part. I've always felt that the people who elect their representative should be the one that supports them. And that we shouldn't see money coming in from outside of the districts. It's a statewide office and the whole state should support it. We shouldn't see money coming in from outside states. And like for a House seat, my House seat, I would like to see it made to where the only money that can be used to support my campaign would be the money that I raise within my district. Which I think would really put a lot of honesty back in the system. And I keep trying to push it, and I keep asking, is there a way to do it? I keep hearing no, but there isn't. And I don't see a reason why there could not be an amendment to the Iowa Constitution, at least for our senators and our representatives, to require that. So, and then as far as term limits, we're talking about at the national level, that's kind of what the Convention of States is trying to address. One of the wings that are trying to get a Convention of States. I will say on the Iowa legislature, we kind of have it by redistricting. I counted up the number of seats that there will be new faces in come next year. Out of the 100 seats in the House, there's going to be absolutely 37 new faces if every one of us that is currently an incumbent wins re-election. So there could be even a greater turnover than that, and the Senate's about the same way.
As far as term limits is concerned, I think that it used to be you wanted to be in state government or federal government because you were a patriot to defend freedom. Now, I think there's a financial incentive. And and they're talking about fundraising, and I believe, if I hear you correctly, I would be on board with cutting the paycheck. I'm not on board with people being career politicians and then leaving millionaires. That confuses me a little bit. It used to be you wanted to do it to defend freedom. Now people want to do it because you get paid hundreds of thousands, not millions of dollars. Term limits, I'm willing to listen to the people on that one. I think it could be good if you have people who we just can't get out. But if you have that one guy in there who's actually a patriot, then he's going to leave because he has exceeded his time. And it could be unfortunate. But right now, yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to having a discussion to set term limits. But right along with that, I think that we should make it not so financially attractive to be a federal or state representative. You're there for the people. You're there to defend our freedoms and our way of life. You're not there just to make money.
I'm definitely for term limits. I think it was Anthony who gave the example of Charles Grassley. Great example, but let me give you a couple of names. Dianne Feinstein, Robert Byrd, Joe Biden. Why do you think we have a ballooning federal deficit? Because of people like that have been in our government too long. But I think the question is probably for here in the state. I would be for 2 terms for senator, so 8 years, and for Iowa House of Representatives, it's either 4 terms or 5 years, so maximum of 10 years, possibly 8 years. But right now I'm working very, very hard to make sure our current representative is limited to 1 term. Sorry, Dennis.
Do we have any others that would like to come up and ask a question?
Can I bring up one topic that we haven't talked about? It's just one and another. It's pro-life, which just happened at the Supreme Court. Can we talk about that real quick? 2 minutes?
1 minute.
Never mind.
There we go.
With what happened, we think, with the Supreme Court the last day, how are we going to proceed here in Iowa? Because if it gets turned back to the states, how far do you think we can take it in Iowa?
Can you clarify that? What do you mean by how far? What do you mean by what we
As
currently
far as abortion, as far as making it illegal or whatever, what are your views?
So I personally believe, life begins at conception. I'm a triplet, so my short story is...
Before you start, we're going to limit it to 1 minute.
1 minute, okay. As a triplet, I almost was aborted. That's simple terms, I was almost aborted. So it's very to my core of why I got into politics. What I think, though, with what has just happened with the Supreme Court is this is what Donald Trump was planning. He put pro-life justices, Congressman King put the pro-life heartbeat bill in 2018, forced the vote, forced the signing of the bill, and now it's on law. Now we need an attorney general who's going to defend that. But I think we can get a life amendment in the Iowa Constitution, and I'm all for that. But I also want to broaden that to taking care of the kids, because we get blamed as Republicans for not caring after the 9 months. I want to publicize the child abuse registry. I want to go after the drugs in our district, and I think specifically they can't come after us anymore saying we don't care about children. We are the party that cares about children. Most of these men have children up here. I do not, but I know they stand for life. I do, and I look forward to seeing that life amendment in the Iowa Constitution.
I'm pro-life. I think that life begins at conception. I think all abortion is murder. Unfortunately, with what was leaked this morning, if it comes into fruition, there's not going to be an immediate change in Iowa because of Iowa Supreme Court cases that are still out there and over the heartbeat bill and some other things. So immediate change isn't going to occur. But we do need to be working to change our Constitution so that there is not a given right to abortion, and that it can't be paid for by tax dollars, and we can't be sending money to Planned Parenthood and other abortion clinics. And one of my fears, though, is that because there's not going to be immediate change in Iowa, you might see people coming from states that have control over their abortion. They might be coming into Iowa for that reason. That's a scary thought, to be honest with you. But yeah, we need to abolish abortion, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with what you said earlier, is how the House and the Senate need to work together on this, and I'm very, very open to adding a pro-life amendment to the Constitution. But they're right. We need to construct something that could also pass the Iowa Supreme Court, because that's where the current bills are now. So I'm definitely open to the heartbeat bill, but I'm also open to examining the Oklahoma bill. We can emulate something like that. So, but I think the key is that the House and the Senate need to work together so we could pass muster with the Iowa Supreme Court.
First Amendment, Section 6 of the Iowa Constitution. All laws of a general nature shall have a uniform operation. The General Assembly shall not grant to any citizen or class of citizens privileges or immunities which upon the same terms shall not equally belong to all citizens. Pause for effect. You can't kill a child. We should have ignored Roe 7 years ago. We would have saved 63 million children. We ignore Roe. Thankfully, I got praising God this morning that we had the opportunity to live in an area, to live in an epoch of time where that ridiculous, fallacious court opinion was sent to the trash where it belongs. States ignore Supreme Court opinions all the time. We outlaw it, we criminalize it, we abolish it completely, period.
I'm pro-life, and I believe, life begins at conception. How far can we take it? We did pass the life amendment not this past session, but the session previous. It has to be passed again by both houses with identical language next assembly, and with 39 new people coming in definitely in the House. Who's to know if that'll happen? I voted for that life amendment, excuse me, and had some sponsors, co-sponsors some other legislation as far as restricting abortion-inducing medications, or whatever we could do, but we're going to have to still wait on the Iowa Supreme Court, see what they decide if the federal court does overturn Roe, and then go from there, I guess. So it's going to depend on the Iowa Supreme Court.
Chuck says no. But if you want.
I think the Department of DHS needs to be reined in and clean house.
Anybody want to?
I don't know that everyone heard the question.
Good.
Go ahead, sorry.
I think the Department of DHS needs to be reined in and clean house.
Sorry.
Agreed.
DHS, Human Services, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we need to have definite oversight over the Department of Human Services. Do you have something specific in your question?
Well, I mean, some of the people that work for them, I mean, they can come in and take somebody's child away from them, and there ain't a whole lot you can do about it.
Yeah, I agree that there needs to be some oversight. What that would look like, I don't know right off the top of my head, but being in school systems, I've seen situations where kids have been taken out of homes and you wonder why. Because from your perspective, that's a pretty darn good home. And then you have kids that they refuse to act on. And you know darn well that the child is in danger, and that's a scary thought. So, those are the topics that need to be addressed.
So specifically DHS.
Anthony, I'm gonna.
No. Oh, you're all good.
I'm sorry. On that note, given the time, guys, I would encourage you to come up and mingle with them individually. So those that would like to get going for the evening can, and those that maybe have further questions for the candidates can come and heckle a little more if you would like. I'd like to say thank you to the Tuesday, but now I hear Wednesday morning coffee group for organizing.
Tom gave us a good name, the 6 o'clock.
The
6 a.m. boys.
The 6 a.m. boys and girl. And also thank you to Producers Co-op for hosting so graciously, and Dave Hicks for helping getting that organized as well. And thank you candidates for your time. I know you're very busy. Appreciate you coming here and answering questions. And thank you to everyone who attended. I think that speaks a lot that you come to find out who is running to represent you in Des Moines. And like I said, if you want to come up and talk to them individually, I encourage you to do so. And everybody travel safe tonight. Remember to vote June 7th.
but don't hurt me bad. As soon as I got to stand up, it's a bitch. I'm just kind of, I'm tired.